أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا محمد المصطفى وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Today, inshallah, we shall be shedding light on several laws regarding Islamic purity, regarding physical purity. As you may know, physical purity is essential because there are certain mandatory deeds that require physical purity, such as salat, prayer, and tawaf, circumambulating the Holy Kaaba. Hence, inshallah, we're going to shed light on multiple laws regarding this important matter. But before we do so, we need to understand that most of the verdicts we shall mention today are the verdicts of Sayed Sistani, Dama Dhilluh. Now, a lot of these verdicts are present in the books of other maraja as well. However, we shall be focusing mainly on Sayed Sistani's verdicts Dama Dhilluh. Hence, if I don't mention to which marja the verdict belongs, assume that it is for Sayyid Sistani. If I mention the verdict of another marja, then I will obviously mention his name. We're going to start off with a few laws regarding water. Regarding water, since water is the main mutahhir, the main purifying agent. So when we come to water, our maraja inform us that number one, we have different types of liquids. One type obviously is water, and the other type is the other type consists of multiple types of liquids, such as oil, for example, or gasoline, or juices, etc. When looking at the liquids that we call water specifically, those liquids are divided into two categories: mudaf water and mutlaq water. What's the difference between these two, and why are we shedding light on these two types of water? Firstly, let's understand the difference. Mutlaq water is a liquid that you can name, or you can call water without adding any other name or any noun to that specific word, to the word water. So for example, ocean water, rainwater, well water, tap water, even the water in your water bottle. All of these liquids can be called water, ma, and you don't have to add any name or noun to the word water. Hence, these liquids are all called mutlaq water in the science of jurisprudence. On the other hand, we have mudaf water. What's mudaf water? It's a liquid that you can call water, but only if you add another name or noun to that word, such as rose water or tea water, ma'il zahr and ma'il shai. You can't call these liquids you can't call them water unless you add another noun or name to the word water. This is why it's called mudaf. Ma mudaf. Ma mudaf is called in English mixed water. So now we understand that the liquids that we can call water are divided into two groups: mutlaq water and mudaf water. Why are we dividing those liquids into two categories because each category has its own specific laws. Before I mention the law, let me just allow this brother into the room because he is waiting. So let's start firstly with mudaf water, which is called mixed water, as I told you. Is it pure or impure? The first question that comes to mind is mixed water, mudaf water, pure or impure? The answer is what? The answer is it's pure. It's tahir. Rose water, tea water, and other types of mudaf water, they're all essentially pure. So if it falls on your clothes, if you touch it with your hand, the clothes and the hand remain pure. A second question which comes to mind regarding mudaf water is, can one purify himself or objects with mudaf water? Can we use rose water or other types of mudaf water to purify ourselves? No, we can't. Correct, it's pure, it's tahir, but it's not mutahhir, it's not a purifying agent. Even rose water is not a purifying agent. So you can use it to clean yourself, but you cannot use it to purify yourself from an impurity. A third question which comes to mind is, if it encounters an impurity, what happens to the mudaf water? For example, I have a bottle of rose water and a drop of blood falls into it. Or I have a container. I have about, let's say, 8 liters of rose water in a container and a drop of blood falls into it. What happens to that rose water or to that mudaf water? It becomes impure. As soon as it comes into contact with an impurity, it becomes impure. All of it, yes, all of it becomes impure. However, there is a case in which mudaf water might come into contact with an impurity, yet it will remain pure. It will remain pure. When is that? When it comes into contact with an impurity as it's moving with force. When you have mudaf water moving with force and contacting the impurity with force, only the amount of mudaf water contacting the impurity becomes impure. The rest remains tahir. The same will be said when we study, inshallah, qaleel water in a few minutes. Let me give you an example to clarify this issue. Suppose we made tea, right? We made tea and we have tea in a pot. And we know that there's a ground in the kitchen that's impure. For example, one day a baby urinated on the ground. We cleaned it obviously, but we did not purify it with water. So now the ground is what? Is mutanajjis, it's impure. And we have this teapot in our hands, and we pour the tea on the impure ground. Now the tea, there's going to be a stream of tea flowing down with force on the ground, on the mutanajjis ground. As a result, what will happen? Only the tea which comes into contact with the impure ground will become impure. The rest of the tea, for example, the tea inside the pot, will remain tahir. It will be pure. So, mudaf water is essentially pure. However, you cannot use it to purify yourself physically if you come into contact with impurities. And if it comes into contact with impurities, it becomes impure, except in the scenario that we just mentioned, when the mudaf water is moving with force. That being said, we move on to the mutlaq water to understand how it is different than mudaf water. Mutlaq water is essentially pure. This is a commonality that both types of water hold. It's essentially pure, and you can definitely use it to purify yourself. Can one use it to purify himself in objects? Of course he can. So it is tahir and mutahhir. One day, inshallah, we'll see that we have a list of mutahhirat, of purifying agents. However, the chief of those purifying agents is what? Is water, al-ma', which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made tahur. Allah ta'ala made this specific creation tahur. Hence, in one of the supplications, we say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ja'ala al-ma'a tahura. Right? Al-ma' is tahur. What does tahur mean? It means it's pure and it purifies other objects or other things. What happens to it if it encounters an impurity? What happens to the mutlaq water when it comes into contact with an impurity? Here we have a detailed answer. We have multiple answers. Why? Why multiple answers? Because it depends on the type of mutlaq water that we're talking about. The answer depends on the type of mutlaq water we're talking about. We said any liquid that you can call water without adding another noun or name to it is mutlaq. But now we must understand that there are various types of mutlaq water, such as the water of a river, such as the water in a lake, ocean water, well water, rain, tap water, or water in containers, etc. In order to make things simple, our maraja divide mutlaq water into two categories as well. Water that is mu'tasim and water that is not mu'tasim. These two categories have different verdicts as well. Let's start with mu'tasim water. What does mu'tasim mean? What does mu'tasim mean? Mu'tasim means that the water is strong. So strong, it will not get affected. It will not get contaminated when it comes into contact with an impurity or when an impurity comes into contact with it. That's mu'tasim water. So if you have mu'tasim water and you have, for example, a drop of blood that falls into the water will remain pure unless it changes in color, odor, or taste. If it changes in color, odor, or taste, then it becomes impure. However, if those changes don't take place, the water will remain pure. Examples of mu'tasim water, as you can see on the screen, are what? Flowing water, which we call in Arabic ma' jari. Bear in mind that a lot of people consider tap water to be ma' jari, which is incorrect. Sayed Sistani notifies us regarding this issue, and he informs us that in many buildings the tap water is considered to be kur water. It's not jari, rather it's kur. Is there a difference between the two? Obviously there is, yes. There's a difference, and sometimes there are different verdicts related to each type of water, to the jari and to the kur water. So you have ma' jari, such as the water of a river. Then you have rain, then you have well water, and finally you have kur, water that has a volume equal to 1 kur or more. All of these types of water are mu'tasim. Which means what? We'll repeat once again. Which means that when an impurity comes into contact with those types of water, or the waters come into contact with that impurity, those types of water remain pure unless they change in odor, taste, or color. If that's understood, then I believe we'll understand what non-mu'tasim water is. Non-mu'tasim water is water that's weak. It's weak, as in when it comes into contact with an impurity, it becomes mutanajjis. As soon as it comes into contact with an impurity, or the impurity comes into contact with it, it becomes what? It becomes mutanajjis. That is qaleel water. Qaleel water is non-mu'tasim water. Qaleel means what? It means the volume, it means the water we're looking at has a volume which is less than 1 kur. Its volume is less than 1 kur. For example, you have a water bottle that contains 1 liter of water, or 2 liters, or even 5 liters. Okay, that's considered to be qaleel. Hence, if a drop of blood falls into that qaleel water, it becomes what? It becomes mutanajjis. It becomes impure. But let's take a look at kur water and some of its details, so we may enhance our understanding regarding kur water and qaleel water. Bear in mind that there are multiple ahkam, multiple verdicts related to or connected to flowing water, rainwater, and well water. But we're not going to take a look at those today. Today we want to focus on what? We want to focus on qaleel and kur water. So we said kur is what? Kur is a volume. 1 second, sorry. We said kur, when we say, for example, 1 kur, or 2 kurs, or 10 kurs, we're talking about a specific volume. The question is, what is that volume? Here, the maraja have differed. The maraja have differed regarding the volume of something that is kur, or equal to 1 kur. Some maraja believe that its volume is equal to 27 handspans. So 3 handspans cubed. What's a handspan? It's what we call in Arabic shibr. When we look at the average human hand, the length of that hand is a shibr. It's a shibr. So some maraja believe that if you have water that has a volume of 3 handspans cubed, so its width is 3 handspans, its length is 3 handspans, and its height is also 3 handspans, then that water is kur. 27 handspans. As for Sayed Sistani Damadullah, he believes that kur water has a volume equal to 36 handspans. So there's a slight difference between his opinion and the opinion of the first group of maraja we mentioned. He believes that kur water has a volume of 36 handspans. So if you have water that has a width of 3 handspans, a length of 3 handspans, and a height of 4 handspans, for example, then that water will be kur. Other maraja presented a third opinion regarding this issue. They said the volume of kur water equates 42 and 7/8 handspans. 42 and 7/8 handspans. So if the width of that water is 3.5 handspans and its length is also 3.5 handspans and its height is also 3.5 handspans, then that will be considered kur water, according to these maraja. Sayed Sistani Damadullah says that based on recommended precaution, one should follow what these maraja, what the third group say. So if you have water that has a volume less than 42 and 7/8 handspans, consider it to be qalil. But remember, this is recommended precaution. It's not wajib. If you're a Sistani follower, you can consider that the water which has a volume equal to 36 handspans is kur water. Does that make sense? Any questions on this point or previous points we mentioned? Okay, now that we understand the volume of kur, what are some important verdicts related to kur water that we have to keep in mind? Number one, kur water does not become impure when it encounters an impurity unless it changes in color, taste, or smell. Remember, it's mu'tasim, so it's strong. If you use it to purify yourself, okay, that water, the water you use, provided that it's kur, will remain pure unless it changes in color, taste, or smell. Let me give you an example. Suppose my hand is covered in blood. I come forth and I wipe the blood off of my hand. So now there is no more blood whatsoever. And I use kur water to purify my hand. This kur water falls from my hand onto my clothes. Are my clothes tahir, pure, or mutanajjis, impure? They're tahir, they're pure. Because I used kur water and there was no blood on my hand. Correct, my hand was impure, but there was no blood on it. I had wiped the blood off of my hand. So when I purify my hand with kur water, such as tap water, the water that falls off of my hand remains what? Remains pure. Thus, when it falls onto my clothes remain pure. Kur water can be used for purification. Obviously, that is quite evident. If that's clear, then now we'll move on to qaleel water. To understand...
Sheikh.
Yes, Hani.
Sheikh Nafwan, question on that example that you used.
Yes.
Where you had your hand, blood on it, and you were using the kur water to purify it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does the water stays pure? Does it have to still be sort of connected to that kur water in order to stay, for that water that goes on your hand, comes off your hand, for that to stay pure? Or can it, as you pour it, disconnect from that kur volume?
Yes. Go ahead, continue, sorry.
No, I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Ahsant.
Yeah, tfadal.
So in both cases, whether it remains connected or it disconnects from the kur water, it will remain pure. it will remain pure.
Okay. Because its source is kur.
Exactly.
Is that why?
Exactly. The source is kur, the source is mu'tasim.
Okay.
So if
Ahsan.
Ahsanallah alayk. So if basically as I'm purifying the hand, as the hand is getting purified, the water is dropping onto my clothes and it's still connected to kur water, then obviously it's still tahir. If it gets disconnected from the kur and falls directly from the kur water onto my clothes, or it falls from the pure parts on my hand, the parts that I already purified, onto my clothes, then it's tahir. Watha hani?
Yes. Okay. Now, what if it? Because you mentioned a detail there.
Mm-hmm.
What if it falls off the parts of your hand? Okay. I mean, your hand is now pure. Once the water makes contact with it, it's pure.
Sah.
Any of the water that comes off the hand then is pure. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So long that we purified the hand with the kur water, then so long that we purified the hand with the kur water, even if we move our hand away from the kur water and drops of water start to fall on مثلا our clothes, those drops will be tahir.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to give an example, inshallah, concerning qalil water, where we'll see a clear difference between kur and qalil water. So before I give the example, let's just keep the following points in mind regarding qalil water. Number one, it is essentially pure and can be used for purification. This is a question that many people might ask. Can you even use qalil water to purify yourself? Of course you can. Of course. Definitely you can use qalil water to purify yourself. For example, the water in the ibriq, in water pots that are in washrooms, for example, that water is what? It's qalil. It's not kur, but you can still use it to purify yourself when you use the washroom. Number two, if qalil water encounters an impurity, then we have two scenarios. Before we tell you whether it becomes impure or not, we have to look at the specific scenario. The first one is it encounters the impurity with force. If that's the case, what's going to happen? Only the water that touches the impurity will become impure. This is where we remember what the example we gave regarding tea, regarding shai, when we were talking about ma' mudaf. So when you have qalil water and it's touching, it's coming into contact with an impurity, if it's coming into contact with the impurity with force, only the part of the qalil water which touches the impurity becomes impure. Let me give you a clear example, inshallah ta'ala. Suppose we have people using water guns. Obviously the water in the water gun is qalil, it's not kur. And they're shooting water on what? They're shooting water on an impure wall, on a wall covered with blood. Now, the water that's coming into contact with the wall obviously becomes impure because it's qalil and it's touching the impurity. Whereas the water that remains in the water gun remains tahir. Why? Because the qalil water is moving with force. It's moving with force. Had it not been moving with force and it was somehow connected to the water in the water gun, all of the qalil water would have become impure. For example, when you have a big container that doesn't have the volume of one kur, and that container contains water, the water will be qalil water. So if a drop of urine, for example, falls into the water, or a drop of blood falls into it, or a drop of wine, etc., then what's going to happen? The qalil water will become impure. But with the water gun example, what's happening here is water is moving with force. So only the amount of water touching the wall that's covered in blood becomes impure. As for the stream of water that is emerging from the water gun and heading towards the wall, before it touches the wall, it's tahir, it's pure. Hence, if someone comes forth and puts his finger, for example, he puts his finger on the water or in the water that is on its way to the wall, his finger will remain what? It will remain pure. So the stream of water that's heading towards the wall remains tahir, it remains pure, and the water in the water gun remains pure. Yes, the water that touches the wall with the blood becomes impure. This is scenario 1. Let's give another example to clarify this matter. Suppose you're holding a water bottle and you have an impure ground right beside you, and you're pouring that water on the ground, so it's coming down with force and it's touching the ground. Or you're pouring the water on a dog. Dogs are najis, right? They're impure. So you're pouring it on the dog and the water is coming down on the dog with force. Does the whole qalil water become impure? No. Only the part that actually touches the dog becomes impure. The rest of the water remains pure. Why? Because it's coming down with force. The other scenario is it doesn't encounter the impurity with force. In this case, the whole water turns impure. All of the qalil water becomes impure when it comes into contact with an impurity if it's not moving with force. If it's not encountering the impurity with force. Okay. This being said, let me mention the example I promised to give. Suppose that my hand was covered in blood and we removed the blood. I wiped the blood off of the hand, and then I used qalil water to purify it. How can I purify my hand with qalil water? Just as I purify it with kur water. Because it got contaminated with blood or through blood, then I'm only required to wash it once, whether I'm using kur or qalil water. I have to remove the impurity, number 1, and I have to wash it once. That's it. Once I wash it once, that will be enough. In fact, for Sayed Sistani damadillo, keep this as a side note. If you wash your hand, for example, that has a najasa on it, that has an impurity on it, and as you're washing it, the impurity gets removed. As soon as the impurity gets removed, you can consider your hand to be tahir. You can consider it pure. Although it's better, he says, based on recommended precaution, that you keep on pouring water to the extent where you'll ensure that you washed it once after the impurity was removed. This is why I'm saying first we should remove the impurity, then we should wash our hands. Nonetheless, whether I'm using kur or I'm using qalil water, if my hand became mutanajjis, it became impure because it came into contact with blood, what I have to do is remove the blood and I have to wash it once. Now, if I use qalil water, my hand will become tahir, it will become pure. But, this is the difference, but the qalil water that falls off of my hand, the qalil water I use to purify my hand and falls off of it, that water becomes impure. So if that water fell on my clothes will become impure. This is one main difference between kur and qalil. Let me repeat so that the issue is clear. If I'm purifying my hand with kur water, after removing the blood, I purify it with kur water once. If the water I used falls onto my clothes remain pure because the water is pure. Whereas, if I use qalil water, and that same qalil water I used to purify my hand falls onto my clothes become impure because that water becomes impure. Make sense, inshallah? Inshallah it does. طيب. Here we have a comment in the slide saying najis and mutanajis. We must understand that there is a difference between something that's najis and something that's mutanajis. Both are called impure in English. When you're talking about something that's najis, in English you say it's impure, and if it's mutanajis you also call it impure. But there's a difference between something that's najis and something that's mutanajis. What's the difference? Things that are najis are sources of impurity, what we call ayn najasa. These sources of impurity, when they come into contact with other objects, with other things, so long that there's wetness on the impurity or that specific thing, that thing becomes impure. On the other hand, when you have a mutanajjis, when we speak about a mutanajjis, we're speaking about a thing or an object which was essentially tahir. It was pure, but it became impure because it came into contact with something that's impure, something that's a source of impurity. Or something else which is also mutanajjis. Let me give you two examples. Suppose you have a bed sheet. The bed sheet is essentially what? Tahir, essentially pure, correct? But a baby urinates on the bed sheet. And then the urine, ajallakumullah, evaporates. This bed sheet is what? Is it najis or mutanajjis? It's mutanajjis. The urine is najis, it's a source of impurity. But the bed sheet is not a source of impurity. It's impure because it got contaminated by the urine. So it's a mutanajjis. Now this same bed sheet, we take it and we throw it on another bed sheet. On another bed sheet that's wet. What happens there? The second bed sheet becomes also impure. It becomes mutanajjis. You can also call it mutanajjis thani. Because of the first mutanajjis, because of the first bed sheet. So what we're trying to say here is sometimes you'll have a thing or a particular object which becomes mutanajjis because it comes into contact with a najasa, with a source of impurity. And sometimes you'll have a mutanajjis, a thing or an object that is mutanajjis because it came into contact with another impurity whilst there was wetness on one of the two items or things. Remember, before we go into the details of the najasat, of the sources of impurity, remember the following rule. They say in Arabic, جَافٌ عَلَى جَاف طَاهِرٌ بِلَا خِلَافٍ. When you come into contact with an impurity, whether you're coming into contact with a najasa or a mutanajjis, ultimately, if both things are dry, then if you're dry and that specific thing that's impure is also dry, then you will remain pure. The same applies if two objects or two things come into contact with each other, and one of them is impure and the other one is pure. If there's no wetness on this object nor that object, the object that's pure remains pure. The object that's pure remains pure. So for example, if I touch a dog whilst my hand is dry and whilst the dog is dry, my hand remains pure. Similarly, if for example there's dry blood on a bedsheet and I touch it with my finger, but my finger is dry and the blood is also dry, my finger remains pure. Hence, in order to transfer the impurity, we are in need of what? Of wetness. Wetness must be present on one of the two things or one of the two objects. That being said, let us take a quick look at the 10 impurities. We're not going to have enough time to cover all or even most of the details regarding these impurities, but since we've mentioned najasat, let us see what are the 10 impurities in Islamic jurisprudence. Our maraja inform us that there are 10 things that are impure, physically impure, which means any other thing on this planet is pure. Unless it becomes contaminated, it becomes impure after coming into contact with one of the 10 impurities. What are these 10 impurities? They are feces, ajallakumullah, urine, blood, semen from a warm-blooded animal, obviously, wine and its twin brother, beer, pigs, dogs, the sweat of a jallal camel, in fact, the sweat of all jallal animals, according to Sayed Sistani, a corpse or a carcass, and finally a disbeliever. Obviously, we have plenty of details regarding each of these impurities. Before we look at maybe one or two details regarding the first two impurities, I want to mention an interesting point regarding jurisprudence. When we study our Islamic laws, sometimes you'll find, in fact, many times, you'll find that there's a relationship between the Islamic law and between our beliefs or our morals. So the Islamic beliefs are kind of intertwined with the Islamic laws are kind of intertwined with Islamic beliefs and Islamic morals. When we look at the chapter of purity, tahara, we can see that there's a strong connection between this chapter and between some of our beliefs. How so? Well, I told you that we have several purifying agents, correct? We have several things that are mutahhirat. Then again, we have 10 impurities, 10 najasat. Here, these laws remind us of what? They remind us of the outer world. Because you have a handful of matters that cause purity, that purify certain things or beings that are impure. Then again, you have a handful of creations that cause impurity. Not purity, they cause impurity. They make others impure. So here we remember how we have a handful of people in society who are imams of guidance, who are tahirin mutahharin. They're pure and purified by God. These people are the sources of purity. There are 14 individuals, peace be upon them, who are the sources of purity. Sources of purity. They spread purity and purify those who have become contaminated or who have become impure. On the other hand, you have a handful of people, imams of misguidance, leaders of misguidance, who are the sources of what? Of havoc, of corruption and mischief, and who mislead others and turn them into impure creations or impure beings. Whereas the majority of the world, the majority of mankind, lies in between the imams of guidance and the imams of misguidance. Some follow this group and some follow that group. Some attach themselves to the imams of guidance, thus they become pure because they've held on to who? To the tahirin mutahharin, to those who are pure and purified. And some become impure because they held on to who? To the sources of impurity. This is one point where we see a connection, a strong connection between Islamic laws and Islamic beliefs and or Islamic morals. Fine. Let us quickly mention one point regarding the first two impurities, feces and urine, and we'll stop for today. Hopefully we'll have another session where we'll continue with these important laws. I believe it's quite known that human feces and urine is impure. What about animal feces and urine? Here, the Maraja, especially Sayed Sistani, they divide animals into two groups. We have warm-blooded animals and cold-blooded animals. What we mean by warm-blooded animals are the ones who have these animals are the ones that once they get slaughtered, their blood gushes out of their body. Whereas the cold-blooded animals are the ones, once they get slaughtered, their blood does not gush out. So an example of a warm-blooded animal would be a cow, or a chicken, or a lion. And an example of a cold-blooded animal would be a fish or a snake. Now, when talking about warm-blooded animals, we have two types, and the same applies to cold-blooded animals. We have halal animals, meaning animals that you can actually consume, and haram animals, animals that you cannot consume, animals that are unlawful, that have animals that are unlawful to consume. So, if the warm-blooded animal is halal, then its feces and urine is pure. Yes, it's gross, obviously, but it's pure, it's tahir. For example, the feces and urine of a cow, or a camel, or a goat, or a horse, all of that is what? Tahir, it's pure. On the other hand, if the animal is haram, such as a lion, or a leopard, or a tiger, and you come into contact with its feces or urine, then you have to purify yourself because its feces and urine is impure. Then again, when we look at cold-blooded animals, we also have halal cold-blooded animals like fish with scale, and we have haram cold-blooded animals like snakes, or like fish that don't have scales. Remember, the only animal that lives in the sea, which is halal, is a fish with scales. So all other sea animals are unlawful, whether we're talking about fish with no scales or we're talking about other animals like octopus, lobsters, crabs, and others. Nonetheless, halal cold-blooded animals are pure. They're tahir. their feces and urine is pure. Their feces and urine is pure. Whereas haram cold-blooded animals, their feces and urine is also pure, except in one case. And that is when the animal is considered to have flesh. If, according to al-urf, according to the general public, the animal has flesh, then its urine is impure. The feces remains pure, but the urine is impure. Bear in mind, before I move to the next slide, that when we're talking about animals being halal or haram right now, we're talking about animals being essentially halal or haram. Essentially halal or haram. There are cases in which an animal that was previously halal, that was essentially halal, becomes haram. For example, when the animal eats human feces, it becomes what? It becomes a jalal animal. Of course, there are details regarding this issue and when exactly does it become a jalal animal, etc. But for now, understand the following, that when an animal eats and nourishes itself through human feces, it becomes jalal. When it becomes jalal, it becomes haram. You can't eat it. Okay? So we have cases in which animals that were previously halal, like cows or chicken, become haram. Right now, I'm not talking about those cases. When we say that we have, halal animals and haram animals, we're talking about animals that are essentially halal or haram. We're not talking about about cases in which animals that were essentially halal become haram, become unlawful. Because those cases also have specific laws, even in the chapter of purity. If this is clear, then we'll move on to our last slide for today, concerning birds. Sayed Sistani tells you that bird feces and urine is pure. It's pure, even if the bird itself is not lawful. Okay. So when we're looking at flying animals, what we call tayr in Arabic, if the flying animal is lawful or unlawful, its feces and urine are pure. An example of a lawful flying animal is, for example, a chicken, although it doesn't fly too much, but sometimes it flaps and kind of jumps in air. Right? Whereas eagles, falcons, crows, bats, all of those are unlawful. All of those are unlawful, and شو اسمه, but their feces and urine remains tahir. Okay, ducks, for example, are lawful, and their feces and urine is tahir as well. Okay. جيد. So we'll stop here for today, inshallah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we'll hopefully we'll have another session where we'll cover more of these important laws. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.